Israel dumps billions of gallons of water into one of Earth's harshest deserts, not by accident, not by mistake, by design. Over half the country, 5,000 square miles of scorching sand and rock, sits completely uninhabitable under normal circumstances. But Israel doesn't do normal. What looks like madness from the outside is actually the world's most extreme water experiment. And beneath the success stories everyone celebrates, engineers are quietly battling problems that could unravel the entire system. This is the truth about turning a desert into farmland. If you enjoy massive engineering projects and future technology, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and comment where you think this technology is heading. The Negev wasn't supposed to get water this way. In 1948, the Hayes Plan proposed sharing the Jordan River basin between 5 countries. Arab nations refused. Then came the Johnston Plan in the 1950s. Same idea, same result. International cooperation collapsed before construction even began. Israel stood alone, staring at a problem no single nation had solved, moving water across 80 miles of hostile terrain, uphill, through mountains, into a desert that kills everything. They built it anyway. The National Water Carrier became one of the most ambitious water projects ever constructed. Giant pipelines stretching across the country, open channels cutting through valleys, tunnels bored through solid rock, and pumping stations powerful enough to move 72 million gallons every day. Completed in 1964, the entire system cost hundreds of millions in 1960s currency. Adjusted for today, that's billions. And it all depended on one source, the Sea of Galilee, a freshwater lake that might not hold enough water to sustain the dream. Engineers knew the risks. Pump too much and the lake dies. Pump too little and the desert stays dead. They chose the gamble. For decades, water flowed south through the carrier, filling reservoirs, irrigating fields, and supplying cities like Beersheba, a metropolis of 200,000 people living in the middle of the Negev. It worked until it didn't. The Sea of Galilee started shrinking. By the 2010s, water levels dropped so low that alarm systems triggered across the entire network. Drought hit harder than any model predicted. The primary source feeding half the country was on the verge of collapse. Israel faced a choice: watch the system fail or rebuild it entirely. They rebuilt. But the solution came with a price no one wanted to pay. 5 massive desalination plants rose along the Mediterranean coast: Sorek, Hadera, Ashkelon, Ashdod, and Palmashim. Each one cost between $200 million and $500 million to construct. These facilities don't just filter water. They force seawater through reverse osmosis membranes under extreme pressure, separating salt from freshwater at an industrial scale. Sorek alone produces 39 billion gallons of drinkable water per year. Together, the plants now supply over 25% of Israel's total drinking water. But here's what the success stories don't mention. Desalination consumes staggering amounts of energy. Running these plants requires power equivalent to a small city's electrical grid. Israel had to link every desalination facility to the national water carrier through $250 million in new infrastructure. And now, instead of relying on natural freshwater, the country depends on machines that never stop running. Engineers turned one gamble into another. If you didn't know Israel's water almost ran out, hit like so more people learn this. While desalination bought time above ground, a silent crisis spread below. Israel's aquifers, underground reservoirs formed over thousands of years, are being drained faster than nature can refill them. The mountain aquifer, one of the country's most critical sources, has a safe yield of 95 billion gallons per year. That's the maximum amount experts say can be extracted without causing permanent damage. Israel pumps out 158 billion gallons annually. That's 66% over the limit. Over-extraction creates a hidden danger. Beneath every freshwater aquifer lies a layer of salt water. When too much freshwater gets pulled out, the salt layer rises. Contamination spreads fast in karstic limestone, the porous rock formation holding Israel's aquifers. Once saltwater intrudes, reversal becomes nearly impossible. Studies show saltwater has already penetrated 50 to 100 meters inland along the coast in just 15 to 30 years. The coastal aquifer, once a reliable backup source, is deteriorating in both quality and quantity. Some experts warn the damage may already be irreversible. Aquifers don't recover on human timescales. If contamination continues, Israel loses its emergency reserves, the underground safety net keeping the entire water system from total dependence on desalination. The Negev, which draws heavily from these aquifers, faces an uncertain future. Engineers can't stop saltwater intrusion. They can only slow it down and hope desalination technology advances fast enough to replace what's being lost underground. Yatir Forest looks like a miracle. 4 million trees planted across 11 square miles of desert, turning barren land into a green wall of Aleppo pine. For 60 years, this forest blocked the spread of sand, trapped carbon from the atmosphere, and served as proof that Israel could reverse desertification. It became a symbol. But symbols crack under pressure. Between 5% and 10% of Yatir is already dead. Extreme droughts over the past decade killed trees faster than new saplings could grow. Some areas show mortality rates exceeding 50%. The 2008 drought, the longest since the forest was established, hit hardest. Researchers found that 77.7% of the dead trees are over 35 years old. The forest is aging out, and climate models predict rainfall will keep declining. Young trees can't survive without water, and water becomes scarcer every year. But tree death isn't the only problem. Ecologists have raised concerns that planting forests and desert shrublands destroys native biodiversity. The Negev evolved as an open landscape. Species adapted to low vegetation, birds of prey, reptiles, small mammals, need clear ground to hunt and survive. Dense pine forests block their habitat. Heavy machinery used during planting crushed delicate soil crusts that take decades to form. Herbicides killed native plants that insects, reptiles, and birds depend on for food. Critics argue that what looks like environmental restoration is actually environmental disruption. Yatir traps carbon, yes, but at what cost to the species that lived there first? Engineers planted a forest to stop the desert. Instead, they may have just replaced one ecosystem with another, without knowing if the replacement can survive the next 60 years. Comment below. Is planting forests and deserts actually helping or hurting? Water doesn't just feed crops in Israel, it fuels conflict. In 1964, Syria launched the Headwater Diversion Plan, an attempt to cut off Israel's water supply by redirecting the Jordan River before it reached the Sea of Galilee. Israel responded with military force in 1965, attacking the diversion infrastructure before completion. Tensions escalated. 2 years later, the Six-Day War erupted. When it ended, Israel controlled the Golan Heights, the high ground containing the sources feeding the Sea of Galilee. Some historians argue water disputes triggered the war. Others say they merely accelerated it. Either way, control over water remains a flashpoint. The United Nations found that Israel's water distribution violates Palestinian human rights. West Bank residents consume roughly 1/6 the water per capita, compared to Israeli citizens. Unrecognized Bedouin villages in the Negev, communities that existed for generations, lack access to the national water carrier despite paying taxes. Land displacement adds another layer. Afforestation projects in the Negev often require clearing areas where Bedouin communities live. Families get evicted to make room for tree planting and agricultural development. Reports suggest these displacements ignore indigenous land claims and disrupt traditional ways of life. Water infrastructure in Israel isn't just an engineering achievement, it's a political tool. And the Negev sits at the center of debates over who gets water, who gets land, and who gets erased in the process. If water is the Negev's first gamble, solar energy is the second. Ashalim Solar Plant, one of the largest concentrated solar facilities in the world, took over a decade to build from 2007 to 2018. It uses 3 different technologies: parabolic troughs, a massive power tower, and photovoltaic panels. Together, they generate enough electricity to power 120,000 homes. On paper, it's a triumph. In practice, engineers discovered problems they didn't anticipate. The power tower, standing 853 feet tall, once held the world record for its type, but locals call it the Eye of Sauron because of the intense glare it produces. Concentrated sunlight creates a visible beam that can be seen for miles, raising complaints about light pollution. More concerning is the backup system. When the sun doesn't shine, cloudy days, nighttime, Ashalim burns natural gas to keep running. It's not fully renewable, it's hybrid. Then there's the cost volatility. In 2017, solar energy from Ashalim cost 40 agarot per kilowatt hour. By 2023, newer solar projects dropped the price to 8 agarot per kilowatt hour. That's an 80% price reduction in 6 years. Investors locked into long-term contracts with Ashalim now face what economists call regret costs. They committed to expensive infrastructure right before cheaper alternatives emerged. Global competition intensifies the pressure. China is aggressively partnering with Israeli tech firms to replicate desert solar and water systems. Chinese companies are building Israeli-designed water purification facilities across their arid western regions. If China scales these technologies faster and cheaper than Israel, the strategic advantage disappears. Israel pioneered the solutions, but there's no guarantee they'll dominate the market they created. Israel recycles 87% of its wastewater. That's the highest rate in the world. The United States recycles less than 10%. Spain, the second highest globally, reaches around 20%. Israel turned sewage into an agricultural resource, investing over $750 million since the 2000s into 67 large processing plants. The Shafdan facility alone treats 97 million gallons of wastewater per day, sending it south to irrigate 60% of the Negev's green zones. On the surface, it's a perfect closed-loop system. Water gets used, treated, and reused. But scientists don't fully understand the long-term consequences. Treated wastewater still contains trace contaminants, pharmaceuticals, microplastics, hormones, and industrial chemicals that standard treatment can't completely remove. These substances accumulate in soil over time. Decades of irrigation with recycled water means decades of buildup. Researchers are studying the effects, but definitive answers remain years away. What happens to crops grown in soil saturated with trace contaminants for 50 years? Do those substances transfer into food? How does long-term accumulation affect soil health, microbial ecosystems, and water tables beneath the fields? The Negev's agriculture depends on this recycled water. If unforeseen problems emerge, there's no backup plan. The system either works indefinitely, or it fails slowly, and no one knows which outcome is coming. If this surprised you, subscribe for more deep dives into projects no one fully understands yet. The Negev produces 40% of Israel's agriculture from half the country's total land area. Farmers harvest wheat, sunflowers, cotton, melons, pomegranates, and almonds in a region that should grow nothing. Israeli tomato yields reach 300 tons per 2.4 acres compared to a global average of 50 tons. Milk production per cow hits 3,430 gallons annually versus 2,640 in North America and 580 in Europe. The numbers look miraculous, but they come at a cost that rarely appears in official reports. Drip irrigation, the technology that makes Negev farming possible, requires constant maintenance and replacement. Emitters clog, pipes crack under desert heat, filters need cleaning. High-tech agriculture isn't cheap. It's heavily subsidized by national infrastructure that costs billions to build and millions to maintain every year. Fish farming adds another layer of complexity. Facilities in the Negev raise 2,000 tons of barramundi annually using geothermal desert water heated naturally to 98 raisewaters underground. The fish release metabolites that fertilize crops. The water cycles through a closed system. It sounds sustainable, but geothermal sources are finite. Pumping too much cools the reservoir. Some geologists warn that over-extraction could deplete these thermal pockets within decades. Israel's Knesset is currently discussing reforms to reduce the number of water corporations due to complaints about high operating costs and financial inefficiency. Critics argue the system only works because the government absorbs expenses that would bankrupt private operators. Other countries are watching. China is building Israeli-designed water cities, but scalability remains unproven. What works for a small nation with centralized control may not work for a continent-sized country with fragmented infrastructure. Climate models predict rainfall in the Negev will decrease by 10% to 20% by 2050. That's less than 25 years away. Israel faces three possible scenarios. In the first, desalination costs continue dropping, solar energy becomes cheaper, and the system sustains itself indefinitely. The Negev thrives. Israel exports its technology globally, transforming deserts on every continent. In the second scenario, energy costs rise. Desalination plants consume more electricity than renewable sources can provide. Fossil fuel prices spike. The cost of producing water becomes unsustainable. Agriculture in the Negev shrinks. Forests die faster than they can be replanted. The population moves north, abandoning the desert cities built over 60 years. The third scenario is darker. Geopolitical tensions over water escalate into regional conflict. Aquifers collapse from saltwater intrusion. Droughts worsen beyond current models. The Sea of Galilee never fully recovers. Israel's system, built on the assumption that technology can always solve scarcity, reaches its limits. And the world watches the only nation that made a desert bloom struggle to keep it alive. The unanswered question isn't whether Israel's engineering is impressive. It is. The question is whether any technology can sustain this level of intervention forever. Can desalination plants run for another 50 years without failure? Will aquifers recover, or are they already beyond saving? Can forests survive in a climate that's getting hotter and drier every decade? And what happens when the cost of maintaining this system exceeds the value it produces? David Ben-Gurion once said the Negev would test Israel's creative potential. He was right. But the test isn't over. The next decade will determine if this is a permanent solution or just a temporary delay. If Israel wins, the entire world learns how to reclaim deserts. If Israel loses, it proves there are limits technology can't overcome. The next decade will decide if this mega project saves or dooms the Negev. Let's bait. If you want more stories about the technologies gambling with our planet's future, subscribe to the channel, smash that like button, and let us know in the comments. Is Israel winning against the desert or just delaying the inevitable?